Yes. What's a BPM? Welcome back. We're going back in time a little bit today, going back to episode 15 with Mark Dynamix. This was when the podcast was audio only, one of my favorite podcasts. So I want to get it on the YouTube channel. So here it is. Enjoy. Welcome to the What's the BPM podcast, Mark Dynamix.
Steve, thanks for asking me.
Oh, mate, we're in your studio. It's it's something else. You got every piece of equipment here that you could imagine.
Well, not quite. There's a lot of old stuff here that I've carried around with me from state to state. A few new toys, but it's just one of those things, you know, you see something new come out and you go, yeah, I really like that. And then you set it up and you have no time to use the damn thing. So there's a lot of toys here that hopefully over the Christmas break I can finish setting this studio up, because I've only been here in this place for around a year now, and it's been a pretty busy year, so I haven't had a lot of time to set everything up, but we're getting there.
Yeah, you got lots of boxes of brand new gear laying around. It's pretty impressive. Mate, we're here to talk about the good old days and bit of history. You're a guy that's been around for what seems like forever. So we got to start at the beginning. You're originally from the UK.
Yeah.
You spent most of your time in Sydney. So let's talk a little bit about your childhood in the UK and when you come to Australia.
Yeah, born in 75, left England when I was 11. We came out to Australia, my mum and dad and I. I think music really started pretty early on for me in England. I mean, Dad was a jazz guitarist. He used to play in bands across the Atlantic in US and UK, boats like the QE2 and the Queen Mary. So there's always music in the house, which was a great thing. There was a lot of difference in the music that my dad liked and I liked, but that wasn't so much of a bad thing. It sort of introduced me to things that I would not probably have heard until much later in life. But, you know, the big thing in the 80s in England was Top of the Pops, and, the equivalent here, of course, is Countdown. And you'd watch Top of the Pops every Tuesday night or Thursday night, whatever it was, and just see all these pop bands on the telly, and it just looked so glamorous. And, it was also becoming quite electronic, with, I think I started watching in maybe 82, 83. And all these synth wave bands coming out and using electronics and keyboards, which interested me because I'd already started piano lessons really early on. So they were using these keyboards on stage at Top of the Pops, like Howard Jones with like 3 keyboards around him and singing at the same time. But I think I started buying records in 83. Definitely the first 12-inch that I bought was Relax by Frankie Goes to Hollywood. But I bought records all that time whilst I was in England from 83 to 87. As I said, I was an only child, so it was really, that was my hobby. I mean, apart from, computers, home computers, we had in England, the most successful home computer was not actually the Commodore 64, it was the Spectrum 48K, which was a computer that didn't make it to Australia, unfortunately, made by Sinclair.
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, little rubber keyboard. So I had one of those in 84 for Christmas, and that was what I used to fill my spare time with around school time, would be, programming and playing computer games and typing in these long programs out of magazines as you would back then. I mean, it just doesn't happen anymore. And buying records and listening to records at home. So I kind of created this bubble, my own little world, My parents were very busy with their own lives, with their own business, which was taking all their time in a pub and a cafe. And it wasn't until 87 until we moved to Australia. And I found that was a completely insular thing, being like that in the UK. It wasn't so much like that in Australia. The people that I was introduced to here, and remember I was only 12 years old then, were going out and hanging out at the park and going on water slides. And it was just a completely and utterly different world. Definitely a different culture, and musically it was completely different here as well. Just how rock and roll it was, Midnight Oil, AC/DC, Metallica, even Iron Maiden were the kind of things that people were listening to at school, and that wasn't what I was into at all. I didn't even know what any of that stuff was. I was just into those UK bands.
Yeah, that's something I noticed when we moved here, was the music was very rock and roll, Jimmy Barnes, AC/DC, all that stuff was massive. But I had a question. So I heard you briefly mention something about the piano. So was you learning how to play music from an early age?
Parents had organised piano lessons for me from around the age of 6. Definitely did that for a few years. And then I remember my piano teacher, she was very old, and she passed away and just between lessons. And that was the end of my piano lessons. So it definitely taught me how to, play chords, how to work things out, what chords go in that scale and things like that. So it definitely came in useful later on in life.
You've experienced a bit of a culture shock. At what point did you start getting interested in like the rave scene and house music? When did that sort of pop up on your radar?
I had seen a DJ mix in the UK before we left, so that would have been 1987. So when we came to Australia, I asked a community radio station if they'd like to have me in to help out, and I started on the phones. It is not 1989, so it wasn't that much longer after we'd come to Australia. And eventually I got my own show. I think that is kind of what led me into going out. I mean, I was still underage at this stage, so I'm only 15. It was a few years yet until I could actually get into clubs. I didn't really go to a rave until early 1993, so I would have just turned 18 then. So it was really radio that gave me some access to people that were involved in the dance music industry. I got to meet a lot of people and that were putting parties on, and they were bringing in guests into the studio, local guests and international guests. I got to interview some amazing people like Laurent Garnier and Basement Jaxx and the Prodigy and Depeche Mode, and I can name check for a while, but it was just amazing. And I'm only 18, 19 years old, and I got to interview at that time my favorite band, which was The Beloved. I love what John Marsh did for The Beloved, and I got to interview him very, very early on, which that interview actually still exists on YouTube. It's quite funny to listen to it now because I sound a little nervous for sure at that age, but you can just tell I'm so passionate about what this band does. I'm so into it. Back then, it's all fresh and new, 91, 92, 93, being introduced to this new world. And on top of that, on a personal level, it was taking me out of my insular space that I'd created for myself as maybe a bit of a protection mechanism back when I was really young. So I was being taken out to dance parties by DJ mates and meeting people. And I mean, that was all brand new back then in 92, 93 for me.
What were the first events that you went to? Can you remember?
I remember there was a party called Amnesia, which didn't do very well. It was at the Tivoli. This was probably the first rave party that I went to, which was a bit of a letdown, that party, because Crisis Point 3 was on at the same night, I think, and that was huge. So, but I got to see all the DJs that I'd met at the record stores like BPM and Central Station and Disco City. They were playing at this party, and it was kind of like one of 100 people on the dance floor. But I was really excited about this music that I was hearing for the first time. I mean, one of the biggest influences was obviously Paul Holden, and because he was such a friendly guy as well, I had many, many conversations with him back in that period, 93, 94. And, he was the kind of guy that was really excited about these younger generation coming through and trying to get involved and learning from them, not all of the DJs were like that, but Paul was one of the good ones.
So at that point, you're record shopping, so you're probably building a good collection of like dance music at that point. When did the first like gigs start? Was it in clubs or just house parties?
Gigs started in clubs first, but only because I was sneaking in the back door. I actually wasn't old enough to get into a club. So this was 16, 17 years old. And I think there were more so, because we used to have a lot of clubs in Sydney in the suburbs, in DY and Parramatta and Cronulla. And these were playing rave music at this stage, because rave had just exploded. And 92, 93, you found all these suburban clubs starting to play really quite hard music. I mean, because everyone was into it, everyone of our age. So, and they just weren't checking IDs back then, especially in the suburban clubs. You could pretty much get in anywhere at 16. Oh, Connections at Penrith was one we used to go to a lot. The danciest they would get somewhere like Connections would be EMF Unbelievable. So, I mean, the fact that they were playing that tells me that it was 1990 when I started going there. So I was definitely only 15 years old. You're allowed in underage, but you couldn't buy drinks. So you just get your mate to go up and buy 6 drinks.
No one's checking.
No one's checking, no. But, it was a more open, freer time then. I think... and at that age, it's all exciting and you're super naive. Like, you have no idea what's going on. You're just going, yeah, I'll go along to that. I'll just try that out.
Yeah, and so what about with your DJing? Like, did you start playing in clubs straight off the bat, or were you doing parties or house parties?
House parties first, backyard parties. I had my own setup that I'd take along to gigs and play for friends, or I was getting some bookings at things as well. The hotels down the end near the Rocks, the big hotel chains, and doing their functions. This is like 92, 93. Doing their functions on their special events and things like that. So playing all sorts of music, even playing 70s and 80s remixes and things like that. But the first proper club, I was probably one of those suburban clubs, and I was definitely led into it by the radio station that I was at the time, which was 280 JFM, the community station. And they had a lot of DJs like DJ Leno, who became, big players in the scene, especially in the R&B and hip hop scene. So they were taking me on as like the new protege, I guess, to play some house music for them. But the first big rave that I played at was Prodigy 6. And that was pretty wild because there was about 5,000 people there, So I'd suddenly gone from playing to 200 people in a club to that kind of size and closing the night out. And, that was what it was like back then. People were really welcoming. Yeah, the radio station was a massive, massive access point for me, but I also loved doing it as well. I love doing radio. That radio station was really rocking from 1990 to about 2000 even. Yeah, for about 10 years. And then people kind of started moving on to other formats. Of course, the mix CD came along in the mid-90s, and that kind of changed things a little bit as well.
So were you still involved with that radio station up until 2000?
Up until 2005.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then I started a show on FBI. There was a thing going on in Sydney where there was only one license up for grabs, and FBI got it over Wild FM. I was on FBI for about 2 to 3 years, but to be honest, at that period, like 2007, 2008, things were becoming so busy and I was trying to juggle so much, I'd had to give something away. And you kind of run out of ideas after being on radio for 18 years. I mean, you got to keep bringing something fresh to the table every week. I gave that away. But, podcasts have come up since then, and we love getting together with people and talking about music and talking about the scene. It's fantastic.
There's not that much old footage of I was going to say just from Australia, but sort of worldwide, there's hardly any footage from the 90s. And if there is, it's usually pretty rough camcorder style sort of recordings. But you would have been playing through the 90s as it sort of exploded. At what point did you notice that you're just basically full-time DJing?
Yeah, probably 97 was the changing point where it became, okay, this is my work now. Yeah. I don't mean in a bad way, but it's like there's enough here for me to actually get by on and work all weekend. Working at Sublime, getting the residency at Sublime was the big change point for me, because up until that point, it was just one-off raves. Like the Prodigy raves, Utopia raves, things like that. And then suddenly I had a full-time residency at Sublime. It was 3 hours a week. And then I used to do the recovery for that as well. And then all these other gigs, regular gigs, started coming up off the back of that. So, things like Sounds on Sunday and at the Greenwood. And there was hundreds of gigs. At some stages I was doing, 6 to 8 gigs a weekend. Oh, wow. But that was the time when we didn't have, politicians telling us what time we should close the club. So we were open, clubs are open from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. and some were 24 hours through the whole weekend. So you always had another gig to go to. You'd start off at 9 and just have a half an hour break in between each one, go to the next one and play a completely different style of music, which was fantastic. You could play house here and then go and play rave at Utopia and then come back here and play chill out or breaks or something. It was fantastic.
Just touching on the lockout laws, what was that like? Just basically killed the nightclub industry, didn't it?
I've gone into this period in so much detail in the past, and Sydney's in a better place now. It's been 2 years since COVID, so that was another thing that obviously fucked everywhere, not just Sydney. That period between 2013 and 2018 was a terrible time for Sydney. I mean, the lockout laws just crushed creativity in that town. So many people left or just gave up. They left and moved to another state. I mean, you're looking at one right now. I left, even though I love going to Sydney now, go down there every second weekend. I'm based in Brisbane now pretty much because of the lockout laws and because of COVID. So it was a crazy time where we just didn't know how to get around this. I mean, the government just wasn't listening to anything that Keep Sydney Open were putting to them. They were just pushing everyone down to the casino. And you have to wonder, what was the reason for that? Was it just about revenue, gambling revenue? Was it about crushing youth dreams? Was it about utter control? Was it blaming everyone and tarring with everyone with the same brush because one idiot did the wrong thing somewhere within the vicinity of a nightclub zone, which is what caused all this? I mean, it's just, I don't even know. I've blocked it out now. I try not to even think about it because it's not the people wanted it that way. The people wanted to keep going out.
So Sublime is like a very famous weekly club night in Sydney. Must have been a real honour to get a residency there. Can you tell us a bit about that?
It was a great little club. It was there for 5 years in Pitt Street, and it was just at the right time. It was just as the generation that I was in, which was, we were all kind of early 20s to late 20s. We were coming out of raves and going into the clubs. The whole thing was moving into the clubs. The music was slowing down from 150 BPM down to 128, 130. And, somewhere like Sublime was the perfect space for a really good sound system, 2 different rooms, low ceiling. And it was the first time that our generation were actually, for a lot of us, were actually in a club rather than being out at a big rave, which is a completely different experience. And I was very lucky to be asked. They had amazing DJs there: Pee Wee Ferris, Nervous, Jumpin' Jack, Nick Fish, Jonathan Wall, and they asked me to join them on Fridays. So I was ecstatic about it. And every Friday night, I'd play from 3 till 6 a.m. and I'd start off house and then get into progressive in the middle, and the tech thing was starting to get big there, that Oliver Lieb sound and that kind of German housey, techie, proggy thing. So that was in the middle of my set, and then at the end, you'd bang it out with the trance classics. Dutch trance was becoming huge at this time. I mean, there was trance prior to that, but it tended to be more the harder German stuff. And then in 97, suddenly we've got new artists such as Ferry Corsten, Armin van Buuren, and that Dutch trance sound wasn't really hard style like it's kind of become now. It was much more melodic, and it was a good introduction for people to kind of house music. It was halfway between rave and house. So this was the kind of music that I was playing there at Sublime. And then, of course, that trance thing just absolutely exploded. And, even in the UK, it's exploded at the same time. In fact, I think Australia kind of got a bit of a head on the UK on picking up this European trance sound. We really got onto it early, the DJs in Australia. And then UK got onto it when labels like Additive, which is a subsidiary of Positiva, started licensing these records for those labels. So you had things like X-Cab's Neuro. They started licensing RMI and remixes of that, John the Dentist, and Marquet Claude, La, and things like records like that. Fantastic early trance records. Anthems, and again, Australia was right up there at the front. It wasn't a 5-year delay before we cottoned onto it. We were actually doing it before the UK cottoned onto it. They were still in handbag house land, up until 97, 98. So it was really, really interesting how things work. Australia is kind of lucky where we get all these influences. Maybe it's the multiculturalism here and we get so much music from different places. Maybe it's because all the vinyl, or the good vinyl, was import. So it didn't matter where it came from: France, Germany, UK, US, wherever. Italy as well, a lot of stuff from Italy. We kind of got a bit of everything. And I find that, or I have found when I've been in countries like the UK and US and especially Germany, that they're very much about their own music from their own country. And yes, they do hear stuff from outside their country and they'll import it in. But Australia, it was just the norm to hear the import stuff as from all over the place. So we got a real mix of music, especially in the 90s, through the 90s and the noughties, when the DJs were buying everything on import. Of course, that still means nothing now because everyone gets the same music all over the world at the same time, the same release time because of digital. But it was a special thing back then when you think back. And I think that's kind of forgotten that we were ahead of the pack in some ways being in Australia and just having such a mix of people from different countries here.
Were you getting many promos sent over, or were you sort of hunting and digging for all your new music?
I was, spending a lot of time in the record stores in Sydney, and whenever I'd go away somewhere, whether it would be interstate or international, I'd pretty much spend most of my holiday time looking in record shops. You know, that's what you did. I was overseas in Germany. We were at the Love Parade at one time, and I think we spent every waking hour traveling around record stores
just to go to different record
in
shops.
Berlin, and of course there were 30 of them. Yeah, it was just, that was what you did. You know, and you'd pick up a completely different sound from those countries, the records you didn't see in Australia, and bring them back. And that was the beauty of it. You'd have music that other DJs didn't have, you know, and you'd be able to play it, and that would actually get you gigs because you sounded unique.
And different music, And
it's so much harder now to sound unique because everyone's getting access to the same stuff. In some ways, it's completely flipped, where the promo records we were getting for free, and we all did get records for free back in, you know, the late 90s and early noughties, they were kind of the ones you avoided because, you know, they mostly commercial stuff that was licensed. And it'd be the import stuff and the rare stuff and the unique stuff that you play. It's kind of the other way around now. The stuff that you'd buy on Beatport, everyone's got access to that. And it's actually the promos that you rely on to have something unique, because you know not every DJ is going to get a promo from that artist or that DJ, and hopefully you've got it and no one else does. So it's completely flipped.
Oh, I mean, for the younger listeners, the effort that goes into hunting, like you just said, you know, you'd be in Berlin and you're digging through record shops just trying to find a new sound. Like, it just was a totally different thing. Hey, it's not like you're just clicking on a mouse, scrolling through charts. It was just, way more difficult.
But it wasn't a chore. You know, I love doing it.
Yeah.
Experiencing the atmosphere in a record shop in Germany compared to, say, you know, BPM or One Stop DJ in Sydney, or even Central Station Records in Brisbane. You know, it was a completely different atmosphere, and you'd pick up things from other DJs. I mean, you know, I remember being in, was it Frankfurt? And Chris Liebing just walks into the store and just like, oh, hello. And then I get introduced to Chris Liebing by Andreas Kefalt, who's, you know, Pascal Fios's label. And he said, oh, yeah, you should come back to our studio, you know. And it's just like one of my techno heroes, you know. And I just bumped into him in the record store. And because we're from Australia, he's like, yeah, come and get involved. So I go over to his studio and he gives me this record, which is a bootleg he's done of some Eminem track, which never got released. He said, I've done 100 copies of this. You take this back to Australia and you play it. Sorry, my German accent is shit house. And, you know, this is the kind of thing that would happen. It would just be so off the cuff, nothing arranged, and things would just happen, and you'd meet people. You know, you get lucky and you just be in there and someone would come in and be like, oh my God, that's Thomas Schumacher. And then you get to strike a conversation with you know, these people that you look up to.
So cool. So you come back to Australia, you're probably bringing back some of the vibes from the events and clubs that you've been to, trying to recreate that with your own kind of twist on it.
So I'd just been, this is 2006, I think, and the minimal sound was just becoming big, and that was totally in the opposite of where the Australian DJs, the parties that I was playing, were playing. I was coming back from Germany, bringing all this techno back from there and minimal stuff. I remember there was a transmission party, and DJ Nervous put me on. He said, I want you to play back to back to back. So it's going to be you, Nervous, and Pee-wee and Nick Fish, and we're all going to play at the same time on 8 decks. And I'm like, how the hell is that going to work? Because we all play different stuff. And of course, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I don't have any of that hard style. I just don't buy that stuff anymore. It's just not my thing. You know, so how are we going to mix records? And even in somewhere within the same BPM vicinity? So the party came around and it started off okay. You know, I probably had 3 or 4 bonsai records that were up around that speed. And then, you know, it started to get a bit harder as they started getting to play their hardstyle. So I thought I'd pull out this John Starlight record, which is this weird-ass German heavy techno record, but it's quite dark. It's not bouncy or ravey like the Australian hardstyle is. And I put this on, and I thought it was kind of would flow fine, and it sort of sounded okay to my ears because I'm tuned to what's going on in Berlin at that time. And I saw Nervous just looking over at me going, mate, no, like doing that across the neck, you know, just like kill it. And I'm like, okay, all right, no worries. So I kind of faded that and put something else in, and then Pee Wee mixed out of that record really quickly. I think he was directed by Nervous to do that. And anyway, it went round to Nick, and then it went round to Nervous, and then came back to me. And I just played 2 of my hardest bangers, but they were just nowhere near hard enough. Yeah. And they were too dark and German techno to even sound remotely like what those guys were playing. And I think it's the only time I've actually been pulled off the decks while I was mid-record.
And that's a huge event.
Yeah, it was a huge event. And I don't think anyone noticed. It looked like I needed to go to the toilet. So Nervous was like, hey, just let the other guys play. I said, what's the problem? I'm playing pretty damn fast. He goes, no, it's too dark. And, I was like, okay, whatever.
Borrow someone's tunes.
Yeah, well, I was like, you know what, if that's what's going to happen, then I've done my 40 minutes. I'm going to go backstage and have a few drinks. I was just not aligned with what was happening in Australia at that point. And up to that point, I kind of had been all the way. I kind of was lucky with the trance thing. I was into the trance thing, and that became big in 97. And Breaks, I got a bit of an early start on that. And it was just lucky. And then around 2006, all this Melbourne bounce stuff is happening and this sort of electro house. And I didn't like it at all. You know, I just wasn't my sound. So I just looked for something else to interest me, which was the minimal stuff and the techier stuff. And that just wasn't being played in the circles that I was surrounded in, you know. And you can't just jump from one group to another completely. It's not like Bang Gang were about to hire me, you know. It's just, it was never going to happen, you know, because, you know, I've got a career that I've associated with a certain group of brands, I guess you could say, and also a particular sound and particular people, and you can't just get up. It's not permitted to just get up and go and work for the underground techno, the underground progressive thing. I mean, as great as that is, it's just a different crew. And, you know, it's not even about elitism or anything like that. It just doesn't happen very often. Yeah. So I really couldn't play this stuff anywhere. And, you know, by a couple of years of pushing to banging my head against the wall to try and play this music somewhere, I just don't think people knew what to expect from me. When they don't know what to expect, they're not going to book you. Yeah. So it was a really strange time, that 2006 to 2009 period. And we were talking mainly about the 90s before. I think the 90s were much more accepting of a DJ just going and playing what he loves at that time and playing it to an audience and having the audience experience it and making their own minds up on whether they like it or not. I think the problem is, as the scene became more corporatized, there were more gatekeepers, there were more middlemen, more promoters kind of dictating what would be 100%. Allowed to happen. Yep. You know, and I think that took the power out of the DJ's hands and put it more into the corporatism of it. I don't know. I just thought it's time to take a break, and that's what I did around that time, 2009, 2010. Yeah.
Mark, I don't normally do this, but I reached out to a friend of mine who I know is a big fan of yours, and I said I was interviewing you for the podcast, and if he had any questions, and he actually had a great question for you at the end of the little audio clip that I'll play in a second. But basically, he's really given you a real pump up and saying that you're a massive inspiration to him. And I guess that's one thing that we should maybe cover a little bit too, is that you guys really led the way. There was no rule book for you to follow. Firstly, I want to give you a pat on the back and say thanks for everything you guys did way back in the day. But also, if you can answer his question, which is at the end of the audio clip, that'd be good too, mate. And I'll play the audio now.
That's epic, dude. He's always been one of my favourite DJs. Like, he was basically one of the key reasons why I started DJing in the first place. Little short story for you. So when I was 16, Just left school, moved to the Gold Coast for like to go into surfing, like going down there to start surfing professionally. Anyway, when I got down there, I went to the Mansion nightclub, and he was playing that night, and I had one of his CDs called Peak Time, and when I saw him DJ, I was like, what the? And I literally stood there to my mate. I pointed at Mark Dynamix and I said, hey man, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to become a DJ. And my mate was like, well, really? Yeah, go for it, man. So essentially, Dynamix, he was so fucking good. He inspired me to literally move home and buy turntables. And one of the very first records I bought was a Central Station record with his name on it. It was off his Peak Time 2 album. And and that's basically how I got into it. So yeah, he's been a huge inspiration of mine, man, like really big inspiration of mine. And even now, like, he's so technically gifted, musically, technically. So if I was going to ask him a question, I would say something like, you've inspired a lot of up-and-coming DJs and locally in Australia with your late 90s, blend of trance and progressive and techno. Have you got any wise words for modern day up-and-coming DJs? What's your words of wisdom for them? Something like that. That's probably the key question, because he's been in the industry for such a long time, he would have a lot of insights, being that he started, I think, in 1989 or something. Long time. That's what I'd ask him.
Wow. Well, thank you, Jared, for those kind words. That's quite a reference. I should put that on my LinkedIn. I often forget that just as I saw DJs mix for the first time in the early 90s, that up-and-coming DJs of the next generation may have looked up to what I was doing or all the other DJs around me at the time were doing, and then used that as a platform or as inspiration to get more involved in music themselves. My favourites in the early 90s were Laurent Garnier and Sven Vath. And then locally in Sydney, Jumping Jack made an impression on me for his music choices, whereas I watched and absorbed what Paul Holden and Pee Wee were doing on stage to create such energy and feedback from the crowd. I mean, all of these moments stuck in my mind and combined in a kind of melting pot from which I drew out things that, meant something to me. And ultimately, some of that mixing style, performance, attitude carries on even 35 years later. So, I don't know, it kind of shocks me to actually hear stories like this. I just hope that the music I play resonates with people and they go home with a smile on their faces. Having heard my take on the music at that point in time, that's really all there is to it. So, to your question about advice I'd give to up-and-coming DJs, it's a tough one because, to be honest, I don't even know how it's done marketing-wise these days. I just continue to do what I've always done, and I'm lucky and appreciative that there's a following there who allow me the opportunity to be musically indulgent every now and again. But if I was starting from scratch these days, I honestly wouldn't know where to start or how to break through. I mean, it's a completely different beast these days. All I can say is that presentation is important, but music selection is paramount at the end of the day. I mean, how many Insta DJs last more than 5 years, whereas DJs who put the effort and thought into their craft, rather than being a show pony, tend to have much more longevity. So cheers, Jared, for the memories, and it's wonderful to hear that the music I played and the way I played it on that night all those years ago inspired you to take up the art of DJing and run with it. That's just so awesome. Thanks, Jared.
Jumping back a bit, we just talked about like the Ministry of Sound tours, and you only got to do one Google on your name and it comes up with like just countless mixed compilation CDs. When did that start? Yeah, tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, it started before the Ministry of Sound thing in Australia. It started in 95. And there was there were already people doing it in the UK. And there was a small dance label in Australia that I was working at as my day job. And they started to put compilations together, house compilations. They wanted to do some rave compilations. So I did a couple of CDs with them, the Anthems 1 and 2. But all of us in the record company, we all had a love for the chill out music that was happening at the time, So we started putting these CDs together like Sundays and Iced Up. And they were really popular. I think we sold more of those than we sold with the rave things, which is really unexpected. And then because of that, that's when Central Station in 97 said, would you like to do some trance CDs for us? We can see that trance has really taken off. That Dutch sound is really becoming big, and they had a lot of connections with those Dutch record labels. So they said, would you like to mix one, a double CD? I got to pick pretty much the whole track listing. I mean, there were definitely some records on there that the label said, oh, we'd love to put this on. They give me a pile and say, hey, we've got to put on some of these. Can you pick the ones you like the most, and we'll put those on, and then the rest you can pick everything. So I think what ended up happening was most of disc 1 was what I liked, and then I think disc 2 had a smattering of what the record company wanted. So there were things that and this is the thing with record companies, they license these records from overseas, and then they've got to make use of them.
Yeah.
And if the DJs don't want to use them, they're at a catch-22. But, you know, a lot of the music back then there was just so much variation in what was being presented to us around 97, 98. It wasn't just one style. So there's a bit of a mix on there. It's not just trance. You know, disc 2 goes into techno. I got to put Christian Varela on there on disc 2, that's really quite obscure techno from Pascal Fios's label, Planet Vision. So that got on there. There's a really obscure mix of Timo Mars Mellow, I think it's called. So these kind of unusual things. Resistance D, You Were There. That's on Peak Time 2, and I think that's the Jam and Spoon mix of that. So there was some pretty underground stuff on there, as well as a few commercial hits. I prefer Peak Time 2 to Peak Time 1. And it's a bit more progressive, whereas Peak Time 1, because it was one of the first trance CDs around that period in Australia, or Australian made, it tends to have a lot of those early hits on there, which I've just heard too many times.
Yeah.
You know, I do love that sound still. I don't get to play that anymore, and I don't really listen to it at home anymore, but, you know, occasionally I'll pop a CD on in the car, and it will be something like that from that period. I go, oh, I now remember why I used to love this sound. It's just got an emotion, an energy, a warmth to it, you know, and it'll probably be a time that's never repeated musically. You know, it's its own time and place, and it brings back memories of what I was doing back in that time. And I'm sure it's the same for everyone else who loves those tracks as well. You know, they remember where they were when they first heard it.
So, and with the Ministry CDs, like they were mainly house, all sort of like house anthems. How did that come about? Like, how did you shift from being known for the trance stuff to the house?
Because the first ones were trance on disc 2. Yeah.
Okay.
So the first ones were Summer Annual, Club Nation, and what became the Annual 2001. And I would mix disc 2, and disc 1 would be someone like GT or Declan or John Corse came on just a year later, I think. So we had a massive explosion of funky house in 2002, and trance had started to die off. You remember trance became a dirty word. Everyone was sick of it, like move on, you know. So everything became pretty much house on those CDs from 2002 to 2006, and then it became electro house from there on moving forward. So yeah, I think it was just a natural progression musically of what was happening in the world, and my tastes were evolving and going with some of that. Sometimes it would go against it, you know, but like we talked about, 2006, I was totally going against what was popular. But at that time, it was pretty much going with what everyone else was listening to as well, because it was great, you know, some of that funky house stuff that was coming out in 2001, 2, 3, it was just awesome. And it was fresh to us raver kids. You know, we hadn't really listened to US house in the 90s. Well, I hadn't. It wasn't until the early 2000s when I started hearing that kind of tempo, and it was a different feel.
People listening would have such fond memories of those Ministry CDs. Like, they were so popular with the women, you know, listening to them before getting ready, before you go out clubbing.
Yeah.
They were so well done, those CDs. Like, you got to give yourself a pat on the back for that. I mean, I don't know the numbers that would have been sold, but I don't know anyone who didn't have those Ministry CDs. You know, everyone had them.
Well, you know, there's a lot sold because they all end up in St. Vinny's.
Yeah, well,
amount of times I get photos on Instagram of people saying, "Oh, look what I just found at St. Vinny's," and it's like a broken copy of Annual 2003 with disc 2 that's cracked in half or something. So yeah, that stint with myself and John from 2001 to 2007, 2008. That was a fantastic time of touring around the country, putting these CDs together. It wasn't just the annual, we were putting sessions together as well, which tended to be a little bit more underground. And, there's some good mixes there that I'm pretty proud of. There's a couple that I'm not so proud of. It's not so much about the mixing. It tends to be the ones I enjoy the most are the ones that have the tracks on there that I love the most.
Yeah.
Mixing's mixing. If you get lucky and you find 2 tracks and the key and mix them together, well, that's great.
Oh, you must have done some amazing gigs. I mean, I went and saw, I would have been to quite a few of them, but the gigs in Brisbane that were at Family were always just off the charts. So, packed house.
It was the highlight.
Just unreal.
Family was the best gig in Australia.
Oh, really?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I remember saying at the time, this is just an amazing club. It's got an amazing sound system. The vibe in here is so good, and the decor and the sound system, and of course the DJ booth being up in the sky. Family brought it back, and it actually worked really well. I remember playing there one night, and I played my set, everything went fine, and then I went down onto the dance floor, and I was standing there listening to Slam from Scotland play a set, and just pumping out this ultra fresh tech house and techno. Nothing too banging hard. It was just really good tech house quality stuff. These records would not work on any other sound system in Australia, because no other sound system has the clarity to make these ultra cool records hold up. But Family does, and you can literally get away with playing anything on that system within reason, and it would sound fucking good. And people around me just probably not realizing that it was only going to be happening for a short period. It was only going to be happening for a few more years, and then that club evaporated, unfortunately. But a standout for sure.
That's so good to hear.
Yeah, Sublime was a standout in Sydney. That's the one people talk about the most. In my circles and my demographic, I think in Brisbane it was Family for sure. Yeah, you'd do the metro gigs around the country, all the major cities, and then you'd go on a national regional tour, which would be another 22 gigs or so per CD.
Or the smaller.
Clubs. So you're talking like Maroochydore, Rockhampton, Townsville, Mooloolaba, Wollongong, Newcastle, Launceston, Davenport, Burnie.
Oh, wow. Exhausting.
Port Hedland, Margaret River. So that was for every CD. So, if you've got sessions, the CD comes out, and then you do 4 weekends of the metro cities. So that's a whole month. And then the next 2 to 3 months would be the regionals. And it would usually be myself and John, but sometimes it would be just John and sometimes just me. And then once you finish that, you come back, do some local gigs, and then start the next CD and start, putting together the CD. So the first part of it is getting a track list together, or even a concept for the CD. When we weren't doing annual, we had to come up with sort of ideas. What is this going to be? What is this album mixtape going to look like? What is this album discotheque going to look like? And what's it going to sound like? And where's it going? What's it trying to prove? What's it trying to do? Putting the track order together, you would send that back to Ministry. They'd go and license whatever tracks they could. And you'd also have a look through their catalogue at that time and see what they've got that is fresh. And then, we'd also get records months before they were released, because they'd send them to the record companies like Ministry first. Let's say Subliminal Records in the US, they'd send a record over 6 months sometimes ahead of release, just so the DJs that are putting these CDs together can hear them and hopefully include them on the compilations. So we were really privileged, we were really lucky in getting all this stuff really early, things like Cosmos Take Me With You and a year and a half before release, things like that, just on a white label. So I'd come back from these regional gigs, get straight into that with the next compilation. And it was a real rushed process to get these CDs together, because they had already booked the tour that was going to happen straight after the release date. They'd already booked the TV advertising for something like the annual for Christmas. So you couldn't be late. They couldn't have a late pressing. And sometimes this licensing would take so long that you'd be left with 5 days to mix the whole CD. And as we mentioned earlier, we weren't doing it from CDs in the beginning. We were mixing off vinyl and then chopping everything together. So, when you've got 22 tracks on one disc and 78 minutes, and you've only got extended mixes to mix together, because the radio edits weren't really on the vinyl most of the time, you're mixing a set together that's 135 minutes long, and you've got to chop that down to 78 minutes somehow. Chopping bits of record out, breaks that aren't really necessary, and also pulling out all of the pops and all of the clicks, because it was off vinyl. So there was no auto declicker, or at least the ones back then were very, very bad quality. They'd take all the top end, strip it completely, so you couldn't really use them. So you'd have to go through and take out every single click through the whole 80 minutes.
Tedious.
And also try and find at least some records that are in key with each other so it flows in the space of 5 days and have a finished product ready for Ministry to pick up. But it only took a few more years, and then mixed CDs were out of fashion, and it kind of just dropped off steadily from there. And when digital came along, and iTunes download first and then digital with Spotify, the drop-off was drastic. It went down from, maybe an average CD would be 150,000 copies, and then it sort of dropped down to 50,000 and 30,000 and then 20,000.
No way.
That was the end of mixed CDs in Australia, at least Ministry mixed CDs. But I don't think too many other people are doing them these days either.
No. Just on talking about the rural gigs, I'm just throwing a bit of a curveball at you here, but it came into my mind. Like, I'm thinking, I've seen some pretty wild things in like nightclubs on, say, at Mooloolaba or Maroochydore. Like, any funny stories you could tell us about some of them, those smaller club shows?
We did one in a tin shed, basically. It was out in the outback. It was in Alice Springs. And it was myself and John playing. And we'd had an interesting day already because we'd been taken out to get on the back of camels in the desert, and they were taking photos of us. And these photos actually never got published because we looked so awkward and dorky that they couldn't use the photos in the end. So it was like, struggling to get on the back of a camel and just laughing our heads off. And we went back to the hotel, and I remember it's distinctly just about to have dinner, and we looked at the menu and there was camel on the menu as a special. I was just like, no, this is not going to be happening. We went to the gig. John had played, and then I started playing, and 3 records into my set, the fire alarms went off, and then the sprinklers went off, and everything had to stop in this venue, and everyone had to get out, and fireys had to come and reset everything, and that took 45 minutes to an hour. I don't know. People were pretty good. I've obviously seen fights on the dance floor. There was a fight ensued on this dance floor in Wagga Wagga in this pub. And I was playing vinyl at the time, mixing vinyl. I was watching this record go around and looked up, and there's just 2 guys punching on. And then, of course, a circle of people ensued very quickly, within, 30 seconds as people clapping them on. And I'm just mixing, tech house records over here. And it was kind of surreal watching the fight just get closer and closer towards me. And I'm just thinking, where's security? Where is there anyone? There's no bar staff. There's no one here on this side of the room except me. In terms of
You're
staff.
going to have to jump in there and break it up.
Well, no, what happened was they came right over. Someone threw a punch, and it went through the plastic surround where we used to have to sort of protect the CDJs, and they got their hand caught in the lead coming out of the CDJs, the RCA cable, and then proceeded to pull their hand back. And in doing that, because everything was connected, it pulled the whole DJ setup onto its back, so it all ended up in the middle of the dance floor. I had records playing at that time, so it was just this cacophony of screeching feedback as the needles got broken on the turntables. I'm shouting towards the bar, is there any fucking security here? It just was insane. Eventually someone came up and they cobbled this equipment back together, put it on the DJ table. Turntables were gone, the tone arms were buggered. Mixer, all of the knobs are all bent over, and it's just fucked. And they didn't have any backup equipment in case this happens. I mean, how can you predict something like this? So in the end, they said, you've got to keep playing, man. We've got like 300-400 people out here. So I ended up just playing a track and then just having a microphone that still worked and just literally getting people to come up and tell jokes in between the tracks, and then just putting the next track on and kind of introducing it like a radio show. It's like, it's the next one from Tom Neville, just fuck. It was hilarious. We all had a laugh about it in the end. It was kind of hilarious. It was just free for all, it was especially the regional ones were really loose. I had some massively loose parties in Townsville, and definitely the Queensland parties were more off the hook usually than anywhere else in Australia. I
bet you've seen some things in the office, in the club office, and I can imagine.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely walked into, like that scene, that movie where Carl Cox is counting thousands of pounds behind a big wooden desk. I've definitely seen that, where I've gone down into the office to go and get paid, and I've seen the promoter or the club owner literally counting their thousands of dollars.
Yeah. Current days, you're still DJing now. You're still working in the industry, aren't you?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about what you do now?
Yeah, both day and night. Day, I work for a company called Orderlize, and we put background music into venues around the country. So that might be department stores, it might be hotels, restaurants. I am their national account manager, so I literally keep the comms going between the client and the company. And I've been with them for 5 years. So that's music industry based. And then at night, on the weekends, there's usually something going on that I'm involved in. Not always DJing. But I do spend a lot of time flying down to Sydney and doing gigs down there, whether it's my own gigs or whether it's ministry tours around the country. There's still a fair bit on, and I still love going out and playing, I think these days I don't get to play as much new music as I'd like to. I still buy a lot of new music, and I try and keep my finger on the pulse of what's exciting me and what's happening in the clubs overseas. I think it's difficult where we've got two demographics running in parallel with each other in Australia. It doesn't so much happen overseas, but here in Australia, and this is for all states, some to a greater extent, some to a lesser extent, where you've got the younger generation, 18 to 25, 30-year-olds, they've got their own thing going on and they've got their own clubs. And then you've got the older generation who are kind of having a renaissance at the moment and going out again because their kids are old enough to look after themselves, and that's your 35s to 55s. And never the twain shall meet. They just do not associate the younger crowd with the older crowd, especially in Sydney. Maybe a little in Brisbane, they do, but they don't in Melbourne either. Perth is a little bit more mixed, I must say, but it's just the way it is. And, I think for DJs of my age, I'm 50 next year, there's just no chance I'm going to get to play in those younger person clubs anymore where the new music is played. So I get put into a different category, which is playing what we might call classics or retro music, or music people are familiar with. And you can still be creative with that and do your own thing. People of our age, most of them, I think, tend to want to go out, and maybe I'm just judging people here, but I think most people want to go out and hear something that they know or are familiar with from that period. To a lesser degree, there's a smaller niche of people of our age that want to hear new music. I definitely want to go out and hear new music. And I want more people to go out and hear new music as well. But they don't seem to be the people, the age group that are buying tickets to clubs that play new music. They tend to buy tickets to things like the ministry shows, which are great fun. And I'm part of them. I love doing them. And
they're amazing.
And it's a great
shows.
spectacle.
Yeah.
But it is a certain type of music from a certain era. And, it caters to that very, very well. But I still like playing new music, and I guess that's missing a little bit at the moment. So maybe that'll change in 2025. As each year goes by, I'm just grateful for what I've been able to experience. And if things come along and I can be part of them, then that is fantastic. I think I have more of a passion to enjoy myself and live in the moment more, which is probably better.
Yeah, definitely better.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on... a lot of DJs have got to do it. It's the whole social media side of, like, if you want to be a professional DJ, you've almost got to be prankster or a joker on social media. It just, I don't really get it, but it just seems like that's a part of it now. Like, what's your thoughts on that?
I think at the beginning of Facebook, I was probably oversharing, not quite understanding how the system worked. What was the benefits of it and what were the drawbacks, or what could come back on you. I think I was also a different person back then in 2015 to what I am now. So now I think I've found the perfect balance of dog videos and music advertisement. And that's pretty much what it comes down to. And that, look, you know what? That's completely representative of my life. My life is music and dogs. So it is, I'm being completely true to myself there. I'm not trying to be someone I'm not. I like having a joke. I like talking to people and having comments come back and going back and forth on Facebook. I don't see any issue with that with social media. I definitely don't post as much as I used to. I mean, pull back a fair bit. But on the other hand, you know, in doing what we do, you do have to market yourself in a certain way to get noticed. Otherwise, you know, you are quickly pushed aside and then you don't get any gigs at all. And then you can't do what you want to do, which is enjoy yourself playing music to other people. You know, so social media is one of those things that we just have to do.
And last question I've got for you. What's your thoughts on the huge amount of dance music that comes out every week now? Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
How can you keep up with it? It's impossible. I actually don't even know where to start. I literally just go to a few sites that I frequently visit and just listen for a couple of hours, as much as I can listen before my ears start getting too tired and I can't distinguish between what's good and bad. And you know what? I used to look for labels. I used to look for artists. I don't even do that anymore. I just go to the prog stuff and just listening to all the new releases and just pick them out without even looking at who it is.
Yeah.
And if I like it, I'll download it and then use it in my sets. That's what I do now. I don't really follow particular artists for a particular sound. You know, I probably miss a lot of stuff by doing it this way, but I think this is also why everything's become so segregated with subgenres of subgenres. I mean, we were talking about this off mic a little bit before about progressive house, how there's so many subgenres of progressive house and it's already a niche area. And I think it's because maybe something to do with when people are looking for music or buying music, they literally have to put in the genre that they're looking for into the search engine or pick on that chart, a top 100. So they're going to get everything within that genre and not really hear anything outside of that genre.
Yeah.
Whereas the difference is, you know, back in the old days, the record stores would go and get on the floor with all of the music and just pick from all the different genres. You know, you wouldn't have it segregated into separate genres. So that probably doesn't help the fact when everything's just coming from one genre. I don't know. Everyone's got their own way of doing it, I guess.
Yeah, I think Tall Paul was saying that it's 80,000 tracks a week get added to Spotify. Like, how can anyone keep up with that? Like, imagine how much good music slips through.
Oh yeah, it's so saturated. You can't find the good stuff for the chaff. There's so much in there.
And Jack the House, that's your own promotion, is it?
Yeah, it's where we go back to 88 to 92. We might call the golden years.
Yeah.
Play all that classic music from that period. So that can be, you know, acid house, Chicago house, hip house, early hip hop. If you know, start off the night with Tribe Called Quest and stuff like that. It doesn't really matter as long as it was being played in that era. And the last show we had Kid Kenobi play and Robbie Lowe and Garth Linton, and it was a stormer. It was absolutely fantastic. So that's really gained momentum again recently since COVID, and it's been going for 10 years. And I love doing it. It's just great.
Wow, so that's been going for 10 years.
Yeah, so
it's
even
like old school in itself.
Even Jack the House that's going back to the classic has been going for 10 years. This is the 10th year. And then the other one that I mentioned was electronic, which is more sort of 80s synth pop and new wave. So that's something completely different. And the reason I do that rather than sort of house music for those gigs is because I grew up with that music. You know, that was the music we talked about right at the top of the show. So, you know, new romantic, 80s pop, UK stuff, Tears for Fears, Depeche Mode, New Order, things like that. And we play the original vinyl and the original 12-inch singles, the extended mixes, and mix it all together. And there's a smattering of DJs in Sydney that have that music on that format, so they can play it. The next one will be in March.
Oh, Mark, thanks heaps for having me over.
No problem, Steve.
Yeah, it's been great. But yeah, thanks again, man. Absolute legend of the scene, Mark Dynamix.
Thanks so much, Steve. Good to talk to you.